Henry, do you have stuff to check? I'd love to hear how it's going for you.
Pretty good. I have a deadline at 4:30 that I'm thinking about, but I'll survive. It's those assignments. It's literally like it just takes forever. I remember you describing your really painful experience, Jeff, where you ultimately had to kind of like phone a friend who you helped in some math portion of it, but he had to help you in the programming. I feel like I'm having to phone a friend, 20 friends for each programming assignment. So hopefully, as I develop more agency over time, I won't have to rely on so many people's help.
When you ask others questions, they get stronger. So recognize that when you're seeking tutoring, you are actually giving a gift to the person that is tutoring you. I mean, that doesn't mean not to be appreciative of their time and et cetera, et cetera. But like so many students get caught in that, like, oh yeah, sorry, I'm asking you this question, but like when they have to explain it to you, their concept images are they're re-triggering the pathways and remyelinating those connections, right?
One last thing I just thought about is there's I guess a series on Netflix called The Playbook, and they feature coaches. So like Doc Rivers and some other coaches. One episode was his name is Patrick. Last name starts with an M, and he's Serena Williams coach, and he coaches 40 players who are top 100 in tennis. And he actually shared that he had to go to therapy and see a psychologist for over a year when he was in high school before he was able to say a single word in in those sessions. And then what he said that really stuck out with me is that so many people labeled him with having a weakness, but now when he looks back on it, he reflects that sometimes our biggest weaknesses can turn into our greatest strengths. So I personally feel my biggest weakness is being able to learn technical concepts at this stage in my life. But I also recognize for sure hella students are struggling learning technical concepts. If I just look at the major spread of undergraduate students at San Jose State, many of them aren't even in the program, right? So I can't wait to turn it into a strength. But
And you're doing that, right? When your mind is now, like, I would say you are fully ignited. The issue, like, so if we the little book of talent talks about ignition, maintenance, and grit, basically, right? So how do you become excited about something? Once you're excited, how do you maintain the discipline on a daily basis? And then long term, like, what are the practices to actually do that? And then, like, the issue of becoming a champion in something, or like one of the top performers, is you gotta maintain that for like year after year, decade after decade, right? And the good news is that I tend to believe that first step is by far the hardest, from the standpoint of once you're ignited, every single moment of every single day is an opportunity to maintain, and then the long-term processes are there, right? And so I think one of the things, like a trap that I see that you get, that I hear you, is you're ignited, but your internal metric is like 10 years ahead of the actual physical stage that you're in, and you're like comparing, like, why can't I do you, right? But what I would say is, like, recognize that you have done, the fact that you're even thinking that way is a huge testament to your strengths, and exactly what you're saying I agree with. Now that you're focused on this, the sky is the limit, because what will happen is you are now, there are some students that aren't even conscious that they've done this stuff, and so they're just kind of like, this is one, you remember I was telling you that I would choose you guys 12 days out of 7? Because a lot of times, the when somebody is privileged from a very young age, they're not necessarily conscious of the privileges that they have, and that's a really scary thing when they become a teacher.
Yeah.
It's okay if they're going to, like, if they're going to become a world-class researcher and get paid to be that and not have to care about their teaching so much. That's great, because then they can be as productive as possible. Like, I do take issue with the idea that nominally those people are sometimes called professors, right? Because they're not professors. They're, I mean, depends on how you define professorship, but like in terms of the amount of emotional and intellectual care that they focus on their students, it's not even in the same realm, right? Yeah. And so when I'm thinking about the teaching aspect, those pieces of your guys' identity will be so powerful in the world of education. Because you will have had to construct out of fucking misery and suffering, not in a bad way, but like that's what this system has to offer for those of us that are not privileged from the age of like 15, right? And so but out of that misery and suffering, you're gonna be way stronger in your mechanisms than many of the people that get through without, because you'll have metacognitive understanding of those concepts. And then two, that's such a powerful pull. Like you can leverage that to do some really amazing things for the least privileged people in our education system.
Really simple example of that is when I was reading those blog posts for the podcast, where I actually just define words that are not like obvious, because that's the reality. Because if anyone were to ever learn what it means to be disciplined, they would have had to learn that. But for people who have never had to learn the word discipline, if I just read it and just continue on, that creates a barrier for them to understand what the heck I'm trying to say. So that's just a small example, but yes, thank you, Jeff, for betting on us.
Always big time, guys.